Distrust, suspicion and mutual accusations. The relationship between the world's two largest economies, China and the US, has been deteriorating, propelled by the Huawei affair, the coronavirus and the trade tensions, among other things. Yet this relationship, more than any other, is central to the way the world works. Is it possible, as some are saying, that a new Cold War is underway? In a previous interview, I talked to Lawrence Summers, former Treasury Secretary of the United States, to get his views. The impression he gave was that the relationship could be on the point of breaking. Giving his perspective on that interview today is Martin Jacques, until recently a senior fellow at Cambridge University's Department of Politics and International Studies, and author of the book When China Rules the World. Welcome, Martin, as always. But first of all, let's hear what Mr. Summers told me about what's causing tension between China and the United States.
I think there has been a general reassessment of the U.S.-China relationship in the United States. Some of that is, as your foreign minister suggests, a product of nationalist forces within the United States, but some of it is a response to what China is doing in Hong Kong. Some of it is a response to Chinese failing to live up to commitments it made with respect to cyber activities in the United States. Some of it is a reflection of the mistreatment of American businesses operating in China. Some of it is a reflection of some very heated rhetoric that has come out of China. So I'm not going to suggest that American policy has been consistently as I would prefer it to be. I'm not going to suggest that there have been no mistakes in the United States. But I don't think that China is, unfortunately, in a position to claim the moral high ground here. There are a variety of traditionally accepted red lines that China has crossed in its rhetoric and in its actions that have created anxiety, not just in the United States, but in many other parts of the world.
So, Martin, the former U.S. Treasury Secretary's list of accusations against China is long, and the impression that I got is that pretty much China is to blame for the kind of reactions that it is experiencing in different parts of the world. Do you share his perspective, or how much do you share his perspective?
Well, what struck me about that clip was that, you know, to use an English phrase, you know, he sort of threw the kitchen sink at China. I mean, you can't say that the reason for the deterioration is, you know, it's Hong Kong, because this deterioration well predates the Hong Kong situation. You know, I think that what Lawrence Summers' contribution reflects is a big shift in American opinion. It's not just Trump. It's also members of previous Democratic administrations. And now why? Why has there been this big shift? I don't really buy Larry Summers' argument that it's just a collection of issues. I think that something bigger has happened, and that bigger is what I would describe as hegemonic angst in the United States. Its position shifted because it began to worry about China's rise. Previously, the United States had believed that the relationship was essentially in its interests and was benign, and China would not become an economic threat, and China would become like a Western country, and so on. And that has not happened. So, so actually, there's some deep underlying reasons for the American shift. And this explains why it's not just Trump, although Trump, of course, is the most aggressive and unreasonable of this position, but it's across, largely across the whole American spectrum.
Well, I also asked Mr. Summers what both sides need to do now in order to defuse tensions, and he also touched upon how China's behavior has drastically changed international economic orders or international orders in general. Let's take a listen to this.
I think both sides need to stop vilifying the other side. Both sides need to act with respect towards the other side. Both sides need to recognize that we are two people in a lifeboat in a turbulent sea a long way from shore. And it doesn't matter precisely what our feelings are. It doesn't really matter what capacity we have to damage each other. We're only going to get to shore if we achieve a measure of cooperation. And we both need to be prepared to do what is necessary to achieve that. And part of that is respecting each other's most fundamental and important interests. That goes to the kind of cyber activities that your country has mounted inside of mine. That may go to provocations that the United States may have engaged in that were excessive. But I don't think the kind of rhetoric that becomes very confrontational is helpful in either direction.
Totally agreed.
And I think in general, when people try to disrupt in a major way the existing order, that is likely to be seen as provocative. That's a position that China takes with respect to declarations of independence from Taiwan. But it's a position that China, I believe, needs to respect more as it contemplates very substantial change in political relationships in Hong Kong. That's something China needs to consider as it seeks to dramatically change the nature of international economic relations.
According to Mr. Summers, China is either trying or China is seeking to dramatically change the nature of international economic relations or disrupting the existing international order. Who defines that order, and do you agree with his perspective?
There's a bigger problem which is stalking the American approach on all these things, you see, which is absolutely germane to your point, which is that China's on the rise. You know, China is not where it was in 1980 or 1990 or 2000 or 2010 or 2015. China is in a transformed position. And it is dealing with a world and an international system and a set of international institutions with certain forms of representation which are really a product of the past. So there has to be an adjustment in the American position. America doesn't dominate the world like it did. and it's finding it extremely difficult to come to terms with this. You know, it is in the American DNA to think it is number one in the world. And the fact of the matter is, it is no longer number one in the way that it was before. It needs, in the first instance, to share the world with China. Of course, share the world with many countries. I think the problem is that over the last several years, the relationship has become more and more antagonistic. And so, you know, we're sort of, you know, we're throwing things at each other. Now, but I would personally hold the United States primarily responsible for that. And I suspect Lawrence Summers might well go along with that vis-a-vis Trump, but he was very cautious diplomatically. I understand his reaction in relationship to that.
Okay, finally, we also talked about, between me and Mr. Summers, we also talked about the possibility of cooperation. Here's what he had to say.
I think we do need to have much calmer and relations with much more mutuality. And I'm sure that when China admits to past errors, when China acknowledges the steps that it has taken that were outside of international norms, I'm sure the United States will be prepared to recognize that it has made mistakes as well. But I don't honestly think that the approach you're taking in this interview, which is to keep turning each issue into a failure of American diplomacy and a American provocation with China as the victim, I don't think that will be regarded as intellectually serious around the world. And so I would hope that in your future dialogues with the United States, you would recognize that there's a lot that is hugely important and beneficial between our two countries, but that we need to work on it in an approach of reciprocity. And I think that's the approach that the American people and their political leaders are likely to want to follow. And I think it can be a quite promising approach. But if you suggest that there haven't been any provocations on the Chinese side, and that it's only the United States that needs to adjust,
that's not
in
my,
all honesty,
that's not my point.
much as I regret it, I don't think that's going to be a constructive basis going forward.
No, that has not been my approach. I would let the audience judge whether I have been reasonable, whether I have really listened very attentively to the points that you wanted to make. And yeah, I'm not going to say anything anymore, but I really appreciated you coming on our show and being frank and sharing with us your very important perspective. Definitely a lot of things to be contemplated on both sides. So, Martin, there you go. He was criticizing me for not being intellectually serious enough in that conversation. I don't want to defend myself, but just the points that he wanted to make about mutuality, reciprocity, what is your feedback?
I understand his point about international norms, but you can't freeze international norms. I mean, sure, China needs to respect them, but you can't freeze them. You know, we're in a different world now. So therefore, China's behavior, what China can do in certain situations, is shifting. You know, I mean, Belt and Road is a huge project which is going to change the world. Where does that fit into existing international norms? It doesn't in any easy sense, but it is. But it's not an abrogate violation of them either. So, you know, international systems and international norms are not frozen. If they were frozen, we'd still have, you know, in the 19th century, the colonial era of tyranny. We would have then the Cold War. Then between the Soviet Union and the United States, then you move into another phase, and now we are moving into a new phase, and this makes it very complicated. And all I would say in relationship to China's position is, yes, it does need to move with great caution. It does need to avoid harsh rhetoric. It does need to avoid verbal provocation. By and large, it has done, but not always.